What would happen if freight brokers disappeared tomorrow? Many carriers believe that brokers are unnecessary, and honestly, as a broker myself, I partially agree with that. It's a complicated question, but Julian and I are going to be discussing it in this video, and we're going to look at it from all different angles. We're going to look at it from a shipper's point of view. We're going to look at it and see how it would impact big carrier companies and how it will affect smaller owner operators as well, which we do think will be different. So would eliminating brokers mean more money for carriers? Since obviously brokers aren't going to be getting a cut, would they suddenly flourish? Or would it instead have detrimental effects and drive many out of business? So there's a theory on this that you should hear, and this is what we're going to be discussing in the video. Also, how would it affect dispatchers, if at all? Remember, what we're going to be discussing today is just our honest thoughts, as unbiased as possible. Julian, how are you? You ready to kick off today?
I am ready to kick off today. You got it.
This is a big one here. This is a very controversial topic. So can you agree for this exercise, this interview type discussion that we're going to have, just to be as unbiased as possible? And I would ask you to try to put yourself in the driver's shoes and try to put yourself in the dispatcher's shoes at times. And eventually we're going to be talking about shippers and try to put yourself in the shipper's shoes and what that means and what this would mean to them. And so for every question, think of it for each party. So do you think you can do that? Be as unbiased as possible?
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're going to get to it. So let's just pretend there's news that tomorrow freight brokers are restricted from doing business. So obviously, if we look at it as a freight broker, there's nothing really to think about for us. We're done, right? We're off finding something else on Indeed. So many carriers, though, would initially probably start celebrating, thinking this is a good thing from what I've seen as far as comments goes online. But I want you to put yourself in the dispatcher's shoes first. Okay, so let's just say that you're a dispatcher, you wake up, and now brokers do not exist. You go into work, you sit at your desk. What do you do next?
Well, if my thought is almost that a magic genie came across and granted these truckers three wishes. One of them would definitely be that brokers no longer existed. So that, like you said, from all the chatter online and all the trucker message boards and everything, I'm under the impression that they think their lives would be a lot easier without us. And if I was a dispatcher waking up day one, post broker life, my first question would be, where are the loads? How am I going to keep my drivers moving?
Yeah.
You got a dispatcher would essentially become a broker. Their job would be me 7 years ago, my first day at League. Looking for customers, looking for loads, and finding a way to be profitable is a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, in this scenario, essentially the dispatcher has to do the job of broker, like you said, and we already know, based on our experience as brokers, that most brokers fail. What would this mean to the drivers in this case? So I presume that a lot of trucks would go unloaded. That would be my guess. So on top of that, they'll have significantly less time to do what their job is, which is dispatching trucks. So you only have a certain amount of time. So if you're not able to dispatch all those trucks because you're trying to prospect, then ultimately you're going to need to make more money on the fewer trucks that you're able to dispatch to make up the difference, because the dispatchers still need to make a living as well. So now the dispatchers are getting paid more per load. So, I mean, there's obviously a slew of issues here. Getting set up with shippers is not easy, and it's not quick. That's the bigger thing, is it's not a quick process. Sometimes it could take days, sometimes it can take weeks. And that is just the setup process. That's not actually prospecting and finding those shippers to be able to work with.
I'm on week 2 of getting set up with a company that I already work with, and there's just a separate department that I have to get set up with, and I'm on week 2 of them reviewing our paperwork. So, I mean, that's a perfect example of what you're saying, and that's a company we already have been working with for 2 years.
What's there to review? I don't know. They already have it.
I don't know what the holdup is. It's a different location, but like I said, it's the hurdles that you have to jump. They wouldn't even know the tip of the iceberg with how these big corporations make you jump through all these different hurdles and hoops to get set up with these companies.
You see, I do want to say, though, that I think dispatchers know this. I think that dispatchers sometimes can look at brokers as the enemy because whenever they call in, it's like a battle, for the rate between the broker and the dispatcher. Dispatcher wants to get as much money on the load as possible, and the broker wants to make a margin, so he's trying to pay as little as possible to a fair extent, right? And, it's all dictated mostly by the market rates. And so I think that is what has really driven a stake through the relationship of brokers and dispatchers. And ultimately, because dispatchers are the representation of the driver, it creates a bad relationship between the two parties as a whole. And we're colleagues ultimately. Obviously the carrier would be, we would have our customer and then we're the carrier's customer essentially, right? But we have to work together to be able to get the load done. And so this bad relationship that has been developed between the two parties isn't doing anybody any good. But I think that a lot of blame does get put on brokers when it comes to any problems that arise that the dispatcher says, okay, well, it's the broker. At the end of the day, though, the dispatcher can already right now go out and try to find freight on behalf of the carrier. So, they could go directly to a shipper now. You know what I mean? So we're pretending like tomorrow we woke up and brokers didn't exist. What would it really change? Because right now, a carrier that has their own MC, their own authority, they can't broker it out. They would have to take the load themselves, but they can work directly with a shipper already if they would do the work. And some do. Some do. Some go out and they build their own book of business, and sometimes they use brokers. Sometimes they never use brokers, but they use brokers when they have to, maybe sometimes. And great. That's awesome. Great job. It does get harder when you do the over-the-road stuff and longer runs. But, what would it really change when the opportunity to do that is already there?
You'd have to have more salesmanship in a lot of these trucking companies. I don't want to be rude or overrepresent dispatchers, but most of the dispatchers I speak to could not call a Fortune 500 company and land their business. It's not their role. A lot of them are from other countries, and that's totally fine. But you need the level of salesmanship. You need to be able to talk on the phone well to non-drivers. It's a big communication issue. Talking to a carrier and talking to our customers and the shippers. You have to handle them differently, and you have to know how to handle them differently. It's not as simple as just picking up the phone and calling, Amazon and getting their business like that. Sometimes it might be that easy, but 90% of the time you need a little bit more infrastructure. And you see it a lot with these bigger companies that have both dispatchers and brokerages. A lot of times there's not a ton of overlap. They keep those departments separate. They're separate workers. And whereas I'm sure that they work a lot together, the trucking company will reach out to their brokerage side to keep trucks moving. But again, those are two separate entities. A lot of times those dispatchers aren't the ones also working in the brokerage department. So that right there should tell you that it's two entirely different jobs.
So you mentioned two different entities, and that's something that I actually wanted to bring up right now, because if a dispatcher doesn't actually work for the carrier company, the MC holder, right, then that is brokering, and that's against the law. So they've been really strict on that the last year and a half or 2 years. Good or bad, I don't know, but that is how it is right now. So you would definitely need to see more carriers, owner-operators going direct to shippers themselves, or paying somebody that is employed by their company, not as a 1099, but as a W-2, to prospect on their behalf for their own moves. All right, so we're going to move on to question 2 now. So, Julian, I want you to imagine that you are the driver, all right, and you wake up to a broker-free world. And just knowing what you know now as a broker, as Julian, right, thinking logically as well while still creating this hypothetical world, walk me through, step by step, what you think will happen today.
If you're away from your home base or whatever customer sent you out for that shipment, chances are you're probably going to have to drive back empty. You may get paid very well to go from, Florida up to, Florida, California. Let's say you get paid a good rate, but you're from Florida and that's where your customer's from. And now you don't have any contacts out in California. How are you getting back? Are you, now your dispatcher has to call around companies, and find you freight, and you're wasting time. Let's say that dispatcher can't, it takes her a week to find you a load. Well, you could have been back in Florida picking back up your next load and working. So for carriers who take loads, and look for backhauls, I couldn't even imagine a world without brokers. If you're an owner op, or if the company you work for doesn't have a brokerage department, or a ton of dispatchers, or a large network of customers throughout the country. Let's face it, a lot of trucking companies they're in industrial areas. They open their doors, they look down their street, and there's a litany of customers ready for them to go pick up loads for. And that's great for, that side of business. But you have to have a nationwide network, or you're cutting yourself off of business. If you know that, oh, this load's awesome, it's going from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin, it's getting paid a great rate. But why would you take that load if now you're going to be stranded there in Wisconsin? It lowers your opportunities. It lowers your ability to make money. And overall, it just hurts your business. It doesn't streamline it in any way. And I would wake up worried if I was a carrier in a brokerless world.
Worried is definitely something that they should be, especially on day one. Now, we keep saying day one, and that's not really, I guess, a fair assessment of what this would be like, because obviously, you rip Band-Aid off, it's going to hurt initially. But even a month down the road, I think, carriers right now, from what we've seen online, from comments, from forums, carriers are very convinced that brokers are not needed. They're taking a share of the pie that they don't deserve even, right? And so I think it would almost be like Christmas morning when they woke up and they'd be so excited. But I also think they would quickly learn that freight is not just there for the taking. It's not, hey, I have a truck, now there's no brokers, I got to fend these guys off from loading me, right? There's just going to be so much freight being thrown at my face. I got to block it off somehow because I only have so much trailer. And that's just not going to be how it is, right? And I do want to say this, though. Not all carriers need to use brokers. And a lot of them don't, actually. I wouldn't say a ton or whatever, but there are carriers that don't use brokers. They have those direct relationships, and that's a great thing. Not all carriers need to use brokers. I honestly think that brokers are almost overused sometimes, depending on the customer, because some customers have common routes that they do all the time, and you don't necessarily need to use a broker if you have a good carrier. Now, there's other things that we're going to talk about in there, such as liability, insurance, bond, things like that we're going to discuss towards the end of this video. But if you are a carrier and you're listening to this and you work directly with a customer and you say, hey, I don't need a broker, hats off to you. And if anything falls through and you need a backup because a load cancels, call us. We're happy to work with you. But you're doing it right. That's a great thing. However, if you're an over-the-road carrier, a lot of times you can't do this. If you're just somebody who's going out and you're just trying to find what pays the best and you don't have those customers lined up, like many owner-operators do not, because many owner-operators can't provide the type of capacity that bigger companies need that ship all over the place. So I think in this scenario, smaller owner-operators, just owner-operators, right, would suffer. I think they would suffer big time to these big carriers because as soon as brokers are out of the picture, we're going to talk about customers here next, but it's a huge opportunity for the bigger carriers to come in and really use their size as power. So that's where I'll leave that. Now, if you do want to go out and you get your own customers, just make sure you're not stealing the customers from brokers that gave them to you. If you want to go out and you say, hey, I'm always in this area, don't call customers that brokers gave you recently. You're going to get yourself in trouble. You don't want the legal trouble. It's not worth it. There's tons and tons of different customers everywhere. Do just like every broker does. Start dialing up, start calling those customers you haven't worked with, and build your book and build it the right way, just like everybody should.
And if you are an owner op, I would recommend just working directly with brokers, because you're doing things on a load by load basis. So there is a way for you, if you have the load boards and some broker contacts, Um, I think it's manageable for you to just book your own loads. And as a broker, I personally prefer when I'm working with an owner op. It's the
Oh, you
single
mean cut
point of
out?
contact
You
is
mean not with the dispatcher is what you're saying?
right, right.
Ah,
I mean, the worst is when I call a dispatcher and I ask for an update and they say, "Well, I gave you the driver number, didn't I?" Because now they expect their job to be done and over with. They don't think that they need to communicate with us anymore because they booked the load and they found and they gave us the driver number. So what are we calling them for? Well, the drivers drive and the dispatchers communicate. That's the way it should work if we're doing things correctly. So, I mean, if you have if you're an owner op that works with a dispatcher who doesn't take their role seriously and communicate and proactive and all that good stuff, get rid of them. I mean, I don't know what they're earning on that side of the table, but of all the jobs in this line of things, the dispatcher is probably the least essential one. And again, that's not. There's great dispatchers who do a wonderful job, but I've had more experiences with the ones who don't.
yeah, that's
Do
a
great
strong
job.
statement there. That's but I'll actually clarify on that because I'll add to it, I should say, because a lot of what you said is actually right. It really is. And I think that somehow dispatchers themselves have allowed the broker space to become bigger than it needs to be. Oddly enough, right? That's ironic. Dispatchers themselves, because the dispatchers aren't going out and trying to find other places. Dispatchers are solely relying on brokers. So if you are relying on a dispatcher, you have to know that you're solely relying at the end on a broker. And if you have a problem with that, then I mean, the dispatcher, that's all they're doing, right? Now, I say that's all they're doing. Let's give some credit to dispatchers who find you the best load, who get you the best paying load. They're making 6-7% or something like that on average. And they're trying to book up a few trucks a day, 5-6 trucks a day. I don't know how many some of the good brokers do. Maybe they have 10. I really don't know that number. But I will say I had that conversation with somebody less than 2 weeks ago. It's probably a week and a half ago about a carrier who is a step deck carrier. And he was saying that he doesn't use a dispatcher, that he works directly with brokers. And sometimes the broker will help him find a load and act as a dispatcher in that capacity. I think that's kind of like what you were saying. The broker can help you out and try to find you loads as well. But at the end of the day, as long as you have a DAT account or a truck stop account, you can dispatch yourself. Not everybody needs a dispatcher, okay? When it comes to getting freight, it's not always a carrier's choice. Customers will choose to work with brokers. And we're going to talk about customers next because customers rely on brokers for so much. And if they choose to use a broker, then you kind of just have to deal with that. Or they'll still go direct to you too, but they're not going to be always posting up on post boards and just trying to spot cover freight, right? That's not going to be what they're going to do. They have way too much to be able to spend their time doing those things. And so they rely on brokers. Now, if you did look at the dispatcher position and say, hey, there's a lot of value here, I will say this, and it's the only not completely pro thing I'm going to say about a dispatcher because I actually have a lot of respect for dispatchers. I get that side of the job. I get that it's important, and drivers sometimes just want to drive. I will say that dispatchers are much, 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 much more important if you don't speak English. If you're a driver out there that has poor English and you're trying to get around and dispatch for yourself, it's going to be tough. And so I have seen over the years this growing amount of owner operators on the road that we don't give out the driver's number. Well, he doesn't speak very good English. It doesn't matter. You can't talk to him anyway. So in that case, dispatchers are absolutely a necessity.
No.
You know why I hate talking about this part? The reason why I hate it is what is the solution? If you're an owner operator on the road right now and you're listening to us and you say, hey, you know what? I'm not so sure that my dispatcher is doing everything that he can for me. What kind of solution do we have for you? Because right now I don't like talking about things unless I can tell you a better way to do it. And that's why I don't really like having this conversation because unless you're going to dispatch for yourself, it's not like, hey, go try this company or try this company. We're not name dropping companies or recommending anybody. We're just saying that part of the industry, right? The dispatcher part of the industry, if any part was as non-essential or redundant, that would be where it is, I suppose. But that is not to say that it's not important. You know what? I just want to say one more thing about that as we wrap out that side of the issue. I don't want to think that I'm against dispatchers in any way. I'm not. I just find it odd if anyone can possibly not see the value in a broker but can see the value in a dispatcher. That's really the only point I'm trying to make here. Is if you don't see the point in a broker and not all a dispatcher does. Obviously, they do paperwork and they try to find you the best roads and the routes, but they're getting them all from brokers. They're not going direct to shippers. They're only using brokers, and so that part to me is kind of just a mystery how that comes up. So Julian, now I want you to put yourself in the shipper shoes. All right, let's pretend like it's not the first day that we wake up, because again, obviously a lot's going to happen on the first day. It's going to be a mess. Let's say we're a month down the road. If you're a shipper, where do you see, what's going on there? Is it just complete panic in there? Obviously you are employing all these brokers, not employing, that's the wrong word. You're hiring out, right? You're contracting all this freight to brokers, and brokers are trying to find carriers through their vast network that they built over years and years and years. And now all of a sudden the shippers are having to do that. They, I imagine, have to hire a lot of people to be able to do the onboarding process, because instead of using just 5 or 6 brokers, you are now, some of these companies, they ship thousands of loads a year. And if the average carrier only takes 10 a year from them or something, just spitballing that number, there's no real number there. But I'm looking at it as a small owner operator's point of view, because I see owner operators getting crushed if brokers are out of the picture, because the only people that can come in and replace, not even replace, but the next best thing, right? What's going to be the next biggest network is going to be one of the bigger carriers that has a larger fleet and can push their size. They can use that size as an advantage over the smaller carriers, over the owner operators. And I don't see it ending well for owner operators at all. But if you're a shipper, you used to use 5 or 6 brokers. Now brokers are no longer in business. What do you have to do to stay in business yourself and get your loads moved?
Just to back up a little bit, I think what's lost is how many shippers there are. Truckers and dispatchers only know what they know. So the customers that they have and that they run with, if they don't work with brokers and they think the world would be better without them, they don't know the vast array of different kind of shippers and what they need. Like I said, I have certain shippers that will call me at 7:00 on a Friday because someone forgot to send a load out. And it gets very confusing when you're working only with the driver. If you're a trucker and you picked up a load from A to B and you took it for, let's just say $3,000, and now they need that same load to go, but it at a completely different time and it's urgent. Well, that $3,000 might not get you out of bed when they need that shipment moved. So, but they're willing to overpay, whatever you got to pay to get it done. But it looks bad if you're the same trucker who ran it for $3,000 and now you're telling him you need $5,000 to run it because it's just an inconvenient time for you. And I don't think carriers would be able to get away with it. And I don't think shippers would feel right paying carriers that. Now, the reason why they pay a broker that is because they know we are using different truckers. We're routing them in from who knows how many miles, and we're there for them at the drop of a hat, day or night. The customers want you to make money as a broker. And if dispatchers and truckers could supply that kind of service, that'd be a whole different story. But when you're the same trucker, you're going to get paid that one rate, kind of. It's really tough to have fluctuations in a market when carriers know how much it takes for you to do the one time. So it's kind of confusing idea to grasp, but in my head, it would be very difficult for shippers to work in a world like that.
Let me ask you this, Julian. If you were to pick the top reasons, it can be 2 or 3 reasons, of why shippers work directly with brokers. And some work directly with carriers, by the way. But why they work with brokers, what would those 2 or 3 reasons be? Obviously, one is what you just mentioned.
Widespread capacity. Insurance is a big one. I know our insurance covers much more than what a normal carrier insurance covers.
So liability.
And the big companies and most of the companies that we work with require $2 million and $250,000 in cargo, which you're just not going to get from truckers. And if you do, that's going to cost the trucking company a lot more money for that service, in which case is going to bump up their rates, going to increase the amount of money they have to make. And now you're looking at the brokers, and we're not so crazy after seeing the rates that we get in comparison to the truckers. There's a lot of costs that maybe they're not seeing. But in addition to capacity and insurance, a big one for me that shippers would be looking at is just that the accounting side of things. They have 30 days to pay us, or 45 days, or whatever your agreement may be. We have to pay those carriers right away for the most part, especially, if they're requesting quick pay and stuff like that. You have to have that capital and you have to be ready to move that money right away. And with the amount of freight some of these customers move, they really do need that little bit of breathing room. Not that they can't afford it, but the transfer of money between them and their customer and us, it takes a little bit of time. And it's not as immediate as a lot of truckers would want it to be.
Yeah, so capacity, right? And then second would be liability. So we offer that protection to the customer. We also offer protection to carriers. We're going to talk about carriers here in just a second, but I do want to just mention he said $2 million and then $250,000 in cargo. The $2 million that he was referring to is auto liability. So now let's talk about the carrier. So not all carriers are against brokers, and even the ones that are still use brokers, it seems. Otherwise, they wouldn't be complaining about it. What do you think are the 2 most important reasons, or 3, that brokers are used by carriers?
Well, backhauls, we kind of touched on this before, but drivers take loads knowing that they have the support of a broker to get them back home or keep them moving. If you were strapped to your one or your couple customers around your home base, you'd be very hesitant to take loads going out of your comfort zone, where you can be getting paid very well to go out to these areas as well. Second one being quick pay, getting money to them faster. We offer quick pay within a week. A lot of companies do have factoring companies, but you can work directly with a broker and get that money upon delivery for the most part. Third big reason for truckers working with brokers would be the bond that we have to have. It's a good insurance for carriers to know if something goes sideways, they do have that bond that they can come after. Not something that the customers have or are required to have, if working with anybody. So that's a risk that we take working with the customers, but the truckers don't have to worry about getting paid. The bonds are $75,000, and that will cover any cost that a trucker would have.
That's true, but I would debate that just a little bit, that, the bond I almost see as a false sense of security. It is something important for brokers to have. The bond's very important. And matter of fact, if a carrier does a load for a broker and the broker doesn't pay for some reason that's unfair, right? Then the bond's going to be there and it's going to pay out the carrier and everything's fine. That's great. But I will make the case that the bond needs to be changed. Because if a broker just goes out of business, it's not protecting but the first $75,000, and even a small brokerage is going to blow through that. So the bond, very, very important, very, very important for carriers. It's very, very important, in my opinion, that we up the amount of that bond. But it's definitely one of the main reasons why carriers would want to work with a broker. But I do hope to see it changed here very soon. So going on now, so let me ask you this question. Brokers no longer exist. You're the shipper. You have loads to move. You pick up the phone. Who are you going to call? Are you going to call a big box carrier company? Or are you going to call an owner operator? Are you going to post up all your loads? Are you going to be able to handle that volume? Are you going to create a team around replacing a broker's team? Because essentially, I mean, how many people do they need to hire? First, number one, these shippers, they don't have anybody to train the people that they hire because they're not brokers. And now they're going to be doing the broker's job, right? Somebody else handled that for them in the past. So now you're hiring out on W-2s these new people to cover this freight. They cost money, and it's going to be a little while, learning curve, before they can actually do the job. But even so, they're a cost to the company. And now they have to go out and find their own carriers. Now they need to invest in the software, and it's only for their own loads. Where as a brokerage, we have so many loads from a ton of different customers that it helps supply that need. And so it helps pay for those costs, and it helps justify those employees and those load boards and the people handling the claims and the accounting for the loads. I mean, it's a mess whenever a company has to look at this that has never done it before, and they have so much freight. I'm talking about, a company that does, tens of loads a week, which isn't actually that much, but I'm just thinking of the minimum where it would just be such a headache. And maybe there's 30 loads a week or something that they do. That is still a big endeavor to take over. That is it. You've never done it before. That's a big deal. So, the fact that carriers or some drivers think that brokers aren't necessary, again, it's partially true. And if you're going direct to a shipper, then that's absolutely fine. But when it comes to mid-size to larger companies, it is very, very, very difficult for a shipper to work directly with a carrier and to handle everything that they need to handle, from claims to accounting to covering loads to dispatching to check calls to closing the loads out and any issues that arise along the way, to the communication and informing their customers where the driver is. They're basically going to have to build in their own dispatch system. That's no small endeavor. So they choose instead to use brokers because we alleviate a lot of that pain, and for the most part, I would assume it's more cost efficient because we have a lot of other customers that we're also doing this for, that we already have the infrastructure to be able to do those things in-house. And so they don't have to go through all of that. They don't have to pay for that. They don't have to build that up. And that is why brokers are so important. And another reason why brokers are so important is because when things do go wrong, we are there to help. When the insurance gets denied, when the insurance company for the carrier denies a claim, then you can go to the brokers as a secondary. So if there was an exclusion somewhere in the carrier's insurance, well, let's look at the broker's insurance now. We still need to be covered. And then it's just another form of liability. It's a form of protection. So we have to remember that as much as the brokers and the carriers can pretend and act like they're against each other, because really it's not reality. We're not. We're on the same page. We all need to get this job done. The broker is there to protect both parties and alleviate all the headaches and make things easier for both parties. That's what he or she is there for.
And I think a main point that we've kind of missed is that the work that we do as a broker, it's not like that work is getting eliminated. It has to happen on one or the other side of the operation. So whether our work is coming from the customer side or whether that work is now moving to the trucker side, what we do, it's not like that work disappears. Everything that we do is now going to get pushed off to someone else and someone else's responsibility. And it's not like we sit here and twiddle our thumbs all day. I mean, it's more than a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. And, these big customers or a big trucking company, you have so many corporate tie downs. And, my one customer, he cannot get a bill paid for his BOL invoices through his own company to save his life. He has to jump through all these hurdles for his own company to process a bill, where he just sends me the email and I do it in 30 seconds. That work, it really is streamlined. And, if the customer is taking on that work, now you have the constraints of their hours and they got to take breaks and they got to do all these things that their company requires. We have very little to no limitations. Our job is to help shippers move freight, whatever the case may be, sun up to sundown. That's our only goal. And we hope that we're helping truckers while doing that. None of us, unless you're a piss poor broker who we don't stand by or don't support in any which way, we're all for good brokers and good truckers. But if you're a good broker, you are going to work every day and you're helping the drivers. You're making sure that they don't get stuck, and you're hoping to pay them a fair price. No one that is doing their job correctly wants to shortchange a driver and make them feel like they got the wool pulled over their eyes and shortchanged on the transaction. Everyone needs to be treated fairly, and you want them to work together again. That trucker is now a partner for you. It's not no one in this combination of work is an adversary. We're all trying to work together. So I understand truckers have got taken advantage of and denied detention and all these things, but it's the broker's job to fight for that detention for you, or just fight for himself. He has to do the right thing and pay you if you are in detention, or if you have a layover, or whatever the case may be. But this whole truckers versus brokers versus shipper thing, you're not getting it. You're not getting the big picture. Think about having to pay a salary for everything that we just went over in this whole video, whether you be a shipper or a trucker. That's no small feat. You have to make sure that person now, let's say you're a trucker and you want to take a week off. Well, now you have a dispatcher who you have to pay and make sure that they're on the clock and making money, rather than just, I'm going to take the week off and that's on me. I don't have anyone else. Or, you don't have to worry about the person if you're on the shipper side. Now you have this in-house broker person who wants to take a week off. Now what? Now what is your department going to do without that person in office? They're going to be calling around looking for help. This is why we're here 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. You don't take this job if you don't want to be reached after 8 p.m. or something like that. This isn't a job for you. You take this job to help people 24 hours of the day. That's what we do.
Well said. All right, so at the beginning of the video, I talked about a theory that has been passed around, and I was speaking with somebody about 4 months ago on this topic. And the theory is that if brokers were to no longer exist, it would be the death of owner-operators. Now, I already touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but there's actually some pretty good thought process here against this or for this, and that is that brokers could even essentially be stopping the rates from going further down right now, because brokers don't requote things all the time, right? Carriers are out there right now just cutting each other's necks. They keep going lower and lower and lower against each other, and it's got to stop. You got to be profitable. Stop going so low. And ultimately, and I've already said this a million times, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but ultimately, if no carrier is willing to accept a rate, the rate will go up. The product's not just going to sit forever. So as helpless as you feel as a driver right now or as an owner-operator, just know that owner-operators or drivers, right? It could be a big company, small company, whatever. They're the only ones that really have the say to pick up a load or let it sit. And we already saw during the last couple of years what happens when we let load sit. Oh, that's not a good enough rate for me. I'm going to let it sit because guess what? You need me more than I need you because there's so much freight out there and there's not enough of us. And so it rises. Keep that mentality because somewhere along the way, only one thing could have happened. And it was somebody, right, said, okay, I'm going to go down. I'll do it for less. And then somebody said, well, I'll do it for less. And then I'll do it for less. And that's how it goes. And that's competition. And then I get that. But it's to the point now where it's so low that it's not profitable. And that's just bad business. It's like buying a product for $1 and selling it for 50 cents. It's not worth doing. And that's why I'm getting a lot of comments about, hey, I parked my truck in January and I went to drive for a company and it's just sitting there. I still pay the insurance on it. And that's crazy. It's crazy, but the rates are so low. And a lot of times it is these big companies that are able to do that. Now, owner operators, we're the ones we want to work with you. Like Julian said, we prefer to work with owner operators, even directly, if possible, than we do these bigger companies. And so we don't want that to happen. And like I said, I think that our success and your success is very tied together. And so if brokers were to go, it would be uh, it would basically be a huge ladder for the already big companies, the already big carriers, to be able to just keep stepping up higher and keep growing and becoming bigger. Because I mean that's what it would happen if I was a customer and there was no more brokers. I'm not going to deal with all this stuff. I'm going to get the five biggest or six biggest trucking companies on the phone that I can. I'm going to get rates from all of them, and I'm going to divide up my lanes. I'm going to say I'm going to call you when I have this, because you have capacity. And owner operators, you cannot compete with some of these bigger companies when it comes to capacity all the time. You're not everywhere. You have limited capacity. And so, I mean, it is what it is. But you have to know that. And so brokers and owner operators, we are on the same page, and everybody needs to realize that. Again, if you don't want to use a broker and you want to go direct and you're able to do it, and you want to use brokers just as a backup plan, I commend you. I hope you can, but not everybody can. It is tough. Remember, 75% of brokers they just fail the first year. They're either fired or they quit because it's way harder than they thought. And I've seen so many people, dispatchers, drivers, jump over and try to become freight brokers, and all of them either fail or at least say that it is way harder than they thought it was going to be. And most fail. So the freight's not just out there for the taking once brokers are gone, if brokers are ever gone. It is tough. And I see it as something very, very bad for owner operators. I also think that freight brokers are actually good for rates right now. I think they would be dropping as much as you guys see other carriers taking cheap, cheap freight. Imagine if they were talking directly to the shipper all the time and they were getting 5 quotes from all these shippers or from all these carriers. If the shipper was getting 5 quotes from all these carriers, each one of them going lower and lower and lower, instead of just giving it for a broker, and the broker, every single week, maybe it's $1,000 this week. Okay, well, I'm going to give it to him. $1,000 next week, I'm going to give it to him because $800 or something like that, right? $850 to the carrier, something like that. And well, what if it was the carrier direct? Do you think that the shipper's just going to give you the $1,000, or do you think that one carrier is going to say 1,000, the next one's going to say 900, the next one's going to say 850, the next one's going to say 800, the next one's going to say 750, until we get to a point where it's just unbearable, even lower than it is now, right?
Yeah.
We've already seen
Well,
it.
it would be what we're seeing now on steroids. With brokers, we're punching these rates into the ground. Without them, I mean, without that extra layer of separation, I kind of touched on it before. You take that rate for the price one time, they're going to expect you to run it for that rate or near that rate every time. There's going to be very little fluctuation in what you guys get paid compared to if we were gone completely.
And at the end of the day, shippers will use brokers even if they can find a carrier to do it at the same rate, right? For us to handle it. So if you think you're going to go to a customer and say, hey, well, you were paying the broker $1,000, I'll do it for $1,000. It's not going to happen. Why? Because he already has a relationship with the broker, number one. Number two, the broker adds another layer of protection for the shipper. And number three, if anything happens with that shipment and you fall off, for example, the broker has a network, a vast network of carrier relationships to be able to recover that shipment for the customer so they don't have to think about it. All right. This isn't something new. And we talk about this
Right.
regulation and deregulation that happened decades ago. Yes, a lot more carriers used to work directly with shippers. But guess what? The networks weren't like they are today. The internet, all the capabilities that we have and brokerages then did not exist like they do today. It wasn't the same. There was no huge brokers that have these vast networks because it wasn't a thing, like you say. So replacing that now and making everybody build up that infrastructure inside their own offices and create dispatching teams and tracking teams and accounting teams for the loads, it's just not worth them doing. If brokers did not have a place in this market, they wouldn't exist. Nobody ever forced, with regulation, or deregulation rather, nobody ever forced anybody to work with a broker. That's just not how it is. And that's what I'm hearing a lot out there is, well, before deregulation, we didn't have to do this. You don't have to do it now. No deregulation is making you work with a broker.
Right. I mean, another thing, shippers care a lot less about all the issues that truckers have than you might think. Oh, your truck broke down, you got a flat tire. Oh, you got held up at your previous delivery and you ran out of hours. Guess what? They don't care. They want, I mean, all it takes is one time and you better not mess up. You think you have a good thing going and you could be the best carrier in the world. Something completely honest happens to you and that shipper needs to get a shipment out. You better have a network or you better have backup truckers ready to go at your company to pick up that customer's load. If not, guess what? That's where we come in. And that's a large part of what brokers do. We don't call companies saying, hey, I want 100% of your freight. Hey, if you're in a pinch, here's my number. Call me. That's what we're there for. If you just totally got rid of us, not a day goes by where a driver doesn't have a breakdown, run out of hours, one of the million things. You guys know better than me, but I'll tell you, we understand. The shippers do not. We can soften the blow and we can recover and we can save face because, again, we have that infrastructure. But if you're taking on this big responsibility for these big customers who are running, some of these companies run the nation with the stuff that they're shipping and everything like that. If those trucks aren't showing up, things will fall off the rails fast.
So if you tell a customer that a load fell off or a carrier fell off a load, their only question is when is your new carrier going to get here?
Right.
They don't.
The email goes, this carrier fell off. The next one will be there in an hour.
There's no giving back
That's how
freight.
that email should be worded. Yeah. You don't even, half the times I don't even tell them a truck fell off. You have a truck booked. There's sometimes, 3-4 trucks fall off. The shipper doesn't know any wiser. The one truck that takes the load arrives and all good.
Well, you don't need to because you're good at your job. You're going to get a carrier in there.
Yeah, you don't take no for an answer. If you have to take a loss, you have to take a loss. That's your customer. You're doing them a service. It's a service forward job. We're all here to make money and we want to make the most money as possible, just like everyone else. But if you're not there to serve your customer, you're not going to be successful at this job. You need one before the other.
You know what I think is funny sometimes is I don't think that some people realize, and I think it's pretty obvious, right? But probably 99% of every company in the United States has tried at some point to have a relationship and go direct to a carrier. They've tried. I mean, it's not something that is new. It's not something that is being pushed by shippers at all. There's no shipper saying, I want to cut out brokers. They don't exist. I've never heard a shipper say it. Then again, why would they say it to me, I guess? But I haven't seen it. I have had shippers try to go directly with a carrier and still use us or whatever, which we're not for that anyway, just introducing, people together. But the problem is, we have had shippers who will try to work directly with one of our carriers, and then it doesn't work out. And then what? They're in a bad spot. And so over time, they've just learned we need to use these brokers because you know what? It's not worth saving the $50 or $100 or whatever it is. Okay, just use the numbers, but whatever it is, it's not worth it when something really needs to go and it costs thousands because it doesn't show up on time. Or I lose a customer. Right. And it loses tens of thousands or potentially millions of dollars because we lost that relationship. It's not worth it.
Yeah, we're not here. It would be nice if we can say we'll save the customer money on every goal and stuff like that. But any good salesman that's not the first thing they're saying when someone answers the phone is, hey, we're here to save you money. No, we're here to get the job done right. We're here to get the job done correctly, and we're here to service you. We'll save you money when we can, but that's not why a customer, I think, is using a broker. A customer is using a broker for all the reasons we just used: protection, capacity, and service. And, if we can save them money while doing that, then that's great. That should always be the goal. But it's service first. And good customers realize that. They don't reach out for us expecting us to have the lowest rate, I don't think. At least that's not my goal, and I tell the customers that straight up. I'm going to be quoting your freight. Don't expect me to be the cheapest. You'll see me being fair. You'll see me probably in the middle of the road, and when you give me freight, you're going to see the truck there on time. And you get what you pay for. I don't care what it is. You get what you pay for.
I mean, as brokers, when we're trying to quote, or when we're quoting, we are trying to quote that in any case, if a fallout occurs and I had to recover it last minute from a truck within 100 miles, what would that rate be? And let's break even on that. That's kind of how we look at it when we quote. So if we have a fallout, 1 out of 4 loads probably falls out in the morning because something doesn't happen. A carrier might not be getting unloaded on time to be able to make our pickup. Guess what? We got to find a new truck. Puts us in a bad spot. And so, we really want to put in just enough margin to, maybe make $150 on some loads. So if it was, let's say $1,000 loads, and we want to make $150, 15%. 15 to 17.5%, I think is fair. You guys can decide. Matter of fact, put in the comment section, what do you think is fair for a broker to make? Honestly, because I want to see this, because I've seen some of the numbers that they think it should be the same as a dispatcher. But if you look at the percentage of the people who actually make it as brokers and how much they have to make per load, because so many fail and it takes a year. Honestly, to be a successful broker on average takes 2 years before you actually start making any serious money, right? And so when I say serious money, I mean over your salary. And so, obviously that depends on market conditions. The last couple of years, it was faster. Right now, man, if you're in this market all the time, remember, a bad market for carriers is just as bad for brokers. You see just as many brokers leaving because they can't make a living in this market. And another thing I want to talk about really fast. I hear a lot of owner-operators saying, well, brokers don't have the same cost that owner-operators have, right? We have our truck, we have our trailer, we have our business expenses. This is not the right way to think about this. And so let me explain why. So the real way to compare an owner-operator would be to a brokerage. So a driver, like a company driver, would be like a broker. But as far as company expense goes, you have to compare that to a brokerage, which has very high company expense with W-2s and insurance and bond and more insurance and more insurance and more insurance.
Software.
There's so much insurance, it's insane. Those are the kinds of expenses. And all your overhead, your rent, your phones, your company equipment, all that kind of stuff for brokers to be able to do their job, the software. That is what should be looked at and compared. So a driver would be like a broker, and a owner-operator, a business owner, would be like a brokerage. And so that's more of a fair comparison. So something to think about. I do see that compared a lot, and I always thought that was really odd. It's like, hey, we're the ones who have all this expense. You guys don't have anything. Well, it's because they're not business owners.
One more thing to touch on that, we just had a month end. We're filming this here on August 2nd. And I cannot tell you how important the end of the month is for certain shippers. And, when the drivers call you looking for the loads, hey, can I pick it up tomorrow? No. Under absolutely no circumstance can this go tomorrow. I mean, I lost 20% on a load I thought I was going to do well on, but I got the truck there on time. I knew I needed to get, or that was it. That was, you can dig the grave now for me and that client. But I knew that going in, that the most important thing is getting that truck there. I'm not going to there was no excuses coming out of me. Whether or not I was making money or not, that truck was showing up on time. And that's something that, a good broker would understand. You can't be having your head so far into the operations and, what about me side of things. It's all service forward. And I keep on coming back to it. I just want to really stress the point, because with the comments that you see online with getting rid of brokers and everything like that, it's one of those careful what you wish for type of things. Because when you're dealing directly with the customer, there is no room for excuses. They just don't care. It could be the most legitimate, well-meant excuse and problem of all time. It doesn't matter. That is why we exist.